Okay, in our lesson today, we are going to discuss excretion in mammals. Now, as you're aware, excretion is quite a heavy topic. It has a lot of content, so I won't be able to compress it into just one lesson. So this is going to be part one. Part two is going to be uploaded real soon. Now, when it comes to excretion, this is a process that is undertaken by all living organisms. So this is the process whereby organisms remove waste products from their bodies. Where are these waste products coming from? They are coming from metabolic reactions that take place within our body. So these are the sum of the physical and chemical reactions that happen in our body. Most of these lead to the production of waste products. Okay, let me give an example of respiration. We are aware of how important this process is. It leads to the production of energy, and this energy is the one that is used to power up the activities that happen within the cell. But respiration also produces waste products, specifically carbon dioxide and in some cases hydrogen peroxide. These cannot be allowed to remain within the body. Why? Because they're going to end up becoming toxic, poisonous to the cells, causing them to die. So this is where the excretory organs come in. Now, mammals are large and quite complex organisms. We have so many different cells in our body, and therefore we need to have an elaborate system of excretion in order to remove all of these waste products. So we have four main excretory organs in our body. We have the skin, the lungs, the kidneys, and the liver. Now, in this lesson of ours, I'm going to focus on the skin. The kidneys will be discussed in detail in part 2. Lungs are briefly touched upon because, they're mostly discussed in gaseous exchange, which I've already done in another video that I've already uploaded. And I've already uploaded videos on how the liver works. So we are only left with the skin and the lungs. Now, what should you expect from this lesson? Number one, I'm going to briefly introduce the skin, talk about its functions, and in detail discuss the structure of the skin. Now, as I'm discussing these, I'm going to be mentioning how the different structures of the skin play a role in thermoregulation, in controlling the temperature of the body. So let's dive in. Now, what are the functions of the skin? We have protective function, excretion of waste, thermoregulation, reception of stimuli, synthesis of vitamin D, and storage of fats. Now, I'm going to go in detail one by one explaining these functions. So let us start with the first one, the protective function of the skin. So the skin protects the underlying tissues from the following. Number one, entry of pathogens. Pathogens are any microorganisms that cause diseases. I'm talking about bacteria, viruses, and such. Now, our skin acts as, this barrier against the pathogens that are present within the environment, okay? Number two, it also protects the underlying tissues from physical damage, mechanical damage. And last but not least, protection from the UV rays of the sun. Now, I'm just going to mention this at this point because when I discuss the structure of the skin, I'm going to come back to this and explain in detail how our skin manages to do so. Moving on to the next, excretion of waste products. So the skin, as stated before, is an excretory organ. What is its waste product? So the waste product that is produced by skin is referred to as sweat. But what is present in sweat? You're going to have excess water and mineral salts and also traces of urea, even lactic acid in some cases. Yeah. Now, the third function, regulation of body temperature. We are mammals, and as mammals, we are going to be endothermic. Our bodies try to maintain the internal body temperature within a certain range, usually between 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. Even though there might be changes in the surrounding, in the temperature of the surrounding. So even though it might be hotter or colder, our body still manages to maintain our body temperature within this range. Now, the skin also plays a role in this. By the way, this is known as thermoregulation, okay? How does it do so? Through the actions of the following structures: sweat glands, hair and erector pili muscles, and lastly, blood vessels. So when I discuss the structure of the skin, I'm going to mention how each of these plays a role in thermoregulation. Next, reception of stimuli. Now, stimuli are any changes that occur in the environment. I'm talking about changes in temperature. Is it hotter? Is it colder? Touch, If someone touches you, you're aware of it. How is this? How does this happen? Pain, you can feel pain from your skin, right? Now, the reason is because we have nerve cells that are present in our skin. Now, these have nerve endings, as you can clearly see this. So, each nerve ending is specialized to detect a certain stimuli. There are those that detect changes in temperature, those that detect touch, pain, pressure, etc. So once they've detected this, they're going to send a signal to the brain so that the brain can then analyze, and interpret the information. Now, up to that point, we are done with the functions of the skin. But don't worry, as I'm discussing the structure of the skin, I'll be mentioning them again and again. Now, when it comes to the skin, it's divided into two main layers. The upper layer is known as the epidermis. The lower layer is known as the dermis. And as you can see from the diagram, the dermis is the thicker layer. And the reason is because a lot of the structures that are found in the skin are going to be present within the dermis, as you're going to see. So when you talk about sweat glands, blood vessels, nerve endings, hair follicles, these are present within the dermis. Now let us start. So I'm going to discuss the epidermis and then move on to the dermis. So as stated, the epidermis is the upper layer of the skin. Now this also consists of three layers, okay? So we have the conified layer, the granular layer, and the Malpighian layer. So the conified layer is the uppermost layer of the epidermis, the granular layer is the middle layer, the Malpighian layer is the innermost layer. Now let us start with the conified layer. Oh, I forgot. I want to show you this. I found it and I thought it was so cool. I wanted to share it with you. Look at the components. You see these components? Look at the cells that make up the conified layer, the granular layer, the Malpighian layer. See how different they are? Especially those of the Malpighian layer. They're so totally different from the first two layers. Let's discuss the conified layer. So the conified layer is the uppermost layer. It consists of dead cells. Yes, you heard me right. It has dead, as in dead cells. And these cells are filled with a tough protein called keratin. Now, whenever you have a structure, that is outermost on the body, and you're being told that it has dead cells and it has a tough protein. Where am I leading with this? I'm leading to the fact that one of the main functions of the conified layer is providing protection. So when you talk about the skin in general, we say the skin provides protection against mechanical damage and entry of pathogens, but it's actually the outermost layer of the epidermis that performs this function. And this is the conified layer. So the conified layer has the following functions. Number one, provides protection against mechanical damage and entry of pathogens. And number two is it reduces the amount of water that we lose through evaporation. Now, we are continuously losing water through our skin in form of sweat, of course. So sweat evaporates from our body. And this is okay. This is normal. This is good, actually. But there needs to be a balance between the amount of water that we lose and the amount of water that we take in. We cannot afford to lose too much water. So when it comes to the conified layer, they reduce the amount of water that is lost. They don't prevent water loss. They simply reduce it. Now, the reason is because, as mentioned before, the cells, the dead cells that make up the conified layer consists of keratin. Now, this protein is hydrophobic. It repels water. So by doing so, it reduces the amount of water that we lose. In case you're wondering what these are, these are pathogens, okay? So essentially what is happening is that they're hitting the barrier of the skin and coming away empty-handed. They cannot penetrate because we have the conified layer for this, and it acts as a barrier preventing the entry of pathogens. Now, when it comes to the conified layer, it's not uniform across our body, okay? This simply means that you're going to have certain parts of the body having a thicker conified layer than others. These are the parts of the body that are exposed to a lot of friction, okay? So I'm talking about the soles of feet, palms of our hands, the knees, the elbows as such. So they have a thicker conified layer. Now, if I may ask you, if we have certain parts that have a thicker conified layer, we are definitely going to have some parts that have a very thin conified layer. Can you mention two parts that have the thinnest conified layer in our body? Just think about it. I'm going to give you a hint. They're both found on our face. There we have it. So we have the area around our eyes and also on our lips. These have the thinnest conified layer. Now, if I were to give you this example to put this into perspective, the conified layer of the soles of the feet can be as thick as 4 millimeters, but that surrounding our eyes can be as thin as 0.5 millimeters. Do you see the difference between these two? Yes. Now moving on to the next, the granular layer. Remember we said that the epidermis is divided into three: conified, granular, Malpighian. Now onto the granular layer. Now this is the middle layer. The cells contain granules, small particles that are visible under the microscope. These are particles that contain keratin. So hence the name. Now when these cells die, they give rise to the conified layer. I want to show you this. See? This is the Malpighian layer, this is the granular layer, and this is the conified layer. So the Malpighian layer is the one that gives rise to the granular layer. And then once the granular cells have died, they form the conified layer. You see the way they are? They become these flat and thin stacks of cells, okay? Because they're dead. That is that on the granular layer. There's not much to say about it, just that it's the middle layer. The cells contain granules, and when these cells die, they form the conified layer. Now moving on to the third and innermost layer of the epidermis, and that is the Malpighian layer. Now, this is made up of cells that actively divide. Whenever you hear this term actively divide, it simply says that. Now, whenever you hear this term actively divide, it simply means that the cells undergo cell division. Now, cell division is literally that. You're going to have a cell dividing to form two new cells. Now, so this is cell division. Now, in this case, it occurs through mitosis. So mitosis is a type of cell division whereby you're going to have one cell dividing to form two identical cells. Now, I want you to look at this. You see this? This is a Malpighian cell that is undergoing cell division. It's not yet complete, but it's almost there. So what will happen is that over time, the cytoplasm is going to constrict, itafinya hapa, separating this, leading to the formation of two cells. So are you seeing that sequence? The Malpighian cells undergo cell division, leading to the formation of granular cells. And then granular cells, on dying, give rise to the conified cells. And this is how the epidermis is formed. So essentially, it's the Malpighian layer that is responsible for giving rise to the whole epidermis. Now, the Malpighian layer consists of cells that are referred to as melanocytes. Now, these cells contain a pigment called melanin. I think this is something that you've already heard before, right? Melanin. Now, why is melanin important? It has two functions. Number one, it absorbs the UV rays from the sun. Now, when it comes to the UV rays, what happens is that they can penetrate the uppermost layer of our skin and interact with the cells. They can lead to changes in the DNA and can also lead to changes in the cell structure itself, which can result in skin cancer. As you can imagine, this is horrific. So melanin plays a role in reducing the effect of the ultraviolet rays. And that is the reason why when you have people that live in areas that where there's a high exposure to ultraviolet rays, they tend to have more melanin in their skin, so a darker skin color. For protection, of course. Now, the second function of melanin is that it gives color to our skin. And that is that. By the way, melanin is not only found in our skin, it's also found in our hair and yes, in our eyes. The more melanin you have, the darker the color. Now, I have a question for you regarding bleaching products. We know that when it comes to bleaching products, what happens is that they lighten skin color. Yes. Now, I want you to tie this to the information that I've just relayed to you. How do the bleaching products affect melanin and specifically the melanocytes? How do they work? Now, the reason why they work is because these bleaching products, most of them contain heavy metals such as mercury. So what happens is that they end up killing melanocytes. So if you have melanocytes dying, that means that overall you're going to produce less melanin and therefore you're going to have skin lightening. But it's temporary. Temporary meaning that immediately you stop using the products, what happens is that you revert to your normal skin color because the amount of melanin that you have in your melanocytes is determined by your genes, which cannot be affected by the bleaching products. So it's temporary. By the way, these are really harmful. So that is that with regards to the Malpighian layer. Now, just a brief summary, the skin is divided into two layers. The upper layer is referred to as the epidermis and the lower layer is the dermis. The epidermis is divided into three layers: the conified layer, the granular layer, and the Malpighian layer. Conified layer consists of dead cells that have keratin. Granular layer consists of living cells, and these are the ones that give rise to the conified layer once they've died. Malpighian layer consists of cells that actively divide in order to form the granular layer. These cells also contain a pigment known as melanin. Now, moving on to the second bit, and that is with regards to the dermis. Now, the dermis has a lot of the structures that are present within the skin. So we are going to focus a lot of our attention here. So this is where you have structures such as the nerve cells, the blood vessels, the sweat glands, hair follicles, and the sebaceous glands. So let us discuss each one of these, starting with the nerve cells. Now, as stated before, the nerve endings of the nerve cells detect stimuli, changes. Now, this has to do with temperature changes, changes in pain, pressure, touch, etc. These are then relayed to the brain for interpretation. Moving on to the next one, the blood vessels. Now, the skin contains a lot of blood vessels. Specifically, it has a lot of capillaries, arterioles, and venules. Now, what are the functions of these? They, number one, transport oxygen and nutrients to the cells of the skin, okay? And they also remove waste products. Remember, the skin is an organ, so it contains numerous cells. These cells require a continuous uptake of oxygen and nutrients. This is provided by the blood vessels that are plenty, and these are found in the dermis. Now, the second function of the blood vessels is that they are also involved in thermoregulation. Remember this? Now, how are they involved in thermoregulation? Now, before I talk about that, I want to mention this. The skin contains arterioles, capillaries, and venules. Let's pause there. When it comes to our body, we have three main blood vessels: the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. But the arteries branch to form smaller blood vessels known as arterioles, which then open up into capillaries. The capillaries then join to venules, okay, and then venules finally to veins. Now, when it comes to arterioles, they have this amazing ability of changing their diameter. They can widen it or narrow it down. Now, the widening of the diameter of the arterioles is known as vasodilation, okay? Dilation, widening. The narrowing is vasoconstriction. So let me show you this. Now, this is the normal diameter of an arteriole, okay? So at this center part, the one that's colored red, is where you're going to have blood flowing. Now, when the muscles of the wall of the arterioles constricts, what happens is that it reduces the diameter. Can you see the difference between this and that? This is narrower, so that means less blood flows across it, okay? Now, in case you're wondering, okay, why would this need to happen? Now, the reason is because when you have temperature changes, for example, when it's cold, what happens is that our body needs to conserve as much heat as possible. Therefore, we need to ensure we are losing very little heat to the surrounding. Now, when it comes to blood capillaries, they are present everywhere. They are found near the surface of the skin. So blood normally distributes heat. So when you have a lot of blood flowing near the surface of the skin, it's going to lose a lot of heat to the environment. The loss of heat, by the way, it's continuous. It cannot be stopped. What simply can be done is either to increase it or decrease it, to ensure that more heat is lost or less of it is lost. Now, when temperatures, for example, are cold, what happens is that you're going to have the arterioles constricting. Look at this. See? This is vasoconstriction. Less blood is flowing out. So less blood means that the capillaries are going to receive less blood from the arterioles, and therefore less heat is going to be lost to the surrounding, which is good because we need to conserve heat since we are talking about the temperatures being low when it's cold. But if it's the reverse, for example, it's hot, or for example, you've undertaken a certain physical activity, the diameter dilates. Look at this. Look at how wide it is right now, okay? So by this happening, you're going to have more blood flowing out, and more blood flowing out, okay, there. More blood flowing out means that more heat can then be lost to the surrounding, which is better because you need to lose more heat since you have too much of it inside your body. So my point is this. The arterioles have this ability to constrict or dilate their diameters, okay, depending on the temperatures in the surrounding. Now, in this case, what has happened is vasodilation. Look at this. You see the thicker shade of red. This simply shows that more blood is flowing through the arterioles and then into the capillaries. So more heat can then be lost to the surrounding, okay? This happens when the temperatures are high, okay, when it's hot. Now, when it comes to the opposite, when temperatures are low, when it's cold, the arterioles constrict. See, less blood is flowing through them and therefore less blood will flow into the capillaries. Hence, less heat is going to be lost to the surrounding. So blood vessels play a crucial role in thermoregulation through vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Now, moving on to the next, the sweat glands. Now, sweat glands are made up of these cold tubes. These tubes contain secretory cells. What is the function of secretory cells? They absorb any excess water, mineral salts, urea from the surrounding blood vessels, and then this concoction is used to form sweat. So the sweat then passes through the sweat duct, this tube, and out to the surface of the skin. This happens through openings known as sweat pore. Now, once it reaches the surface of the skin, what happens is that the sweat, which is going to be in liquid form initially, absorbs heat from our body and then evaporates. This leaves us with this cooling effect. So, of course, you're going to have sweat glands playing a role in thermoregulation. So sweat glands actually have two functions. Number one, excretion, of course, of excess water and mineral salts. And number two, thermoregulation. Now, how does this happen? When it's hot, what do? We sweat more. And the reason why we sweat more, because this is our body's way of trying to reduce the amount of heat that we have. So when the sweat passes out onto the surface of our skin, it absorbs heat from our body and evaporates. And this leaves us with this cooling effect, okay? Because heat has been lost to the surrounding. But when it's cold, we sweat less. Why? Because this is our body's mechanism of conserving as much heat as possible because it's cold, okay? We cannot afford to lose a lot of it. So sweat glands. Now, let me ask you this. If you have been paying attention, what are the four components that are present in sweat? TikTok. So we have water, salts, urea, and a little bit of lactic acid. Now, moving on to the next structure, hair. Now, hair arises from the hair follicles. So the hair follicles are deep within the dermis. So this is the hair shaft. And as you can see, it has passed across, it's above the skin surface as such. Now, hair actually consists of dead cells that also contain keratin. Remember keratin? So we have keratin in our hair. We have it in the conified layer. We also have it in our nails. It's also present in the hoofs and horns of animals. Now, hair is dead cells, and that is the reason why whenever you touch the ends of the hair, you cannot feel any sensation, even when you cut it or whatever, you don't feel anything. But of course, if you were to pull it, then yes, you're going to feel a little bit of pressure or pain depending on the amount of force you're exerting. And the reason is because you are stimulating the nerve endings that are present within the dermis. So of course, they are going to detect this and relay the transmission to the brain. But hair by itself just consists of dead cells. Now, the hair follicle is attached to a muscle known as the erector pili muscle. Now, this muscle, on contracting or relaxing, is capable of changing the angle of the hair. Okay, and it can cause the hair either to lie flat on the surface of the skin or become erect. Now, let us discuss that in detail. This, of course, has to do with thermoregulation. Now, when the temperatures are low, okay, when it's cold, So when it's cold, what happens is that you're going to have the erector pili muscle contract. This is a muscle, so it can contract, it can also relax. So in this case, when the temperatures are low, the erector pili muscle contracts And when it does so, it causes the hair to stand erect, to stand upright. Now, this is going to trap a layer of air. So you're going to have a layer of air around the surface. Remember, we're going to have one hair and another over here and another and another. So in between the hair, you're going to have a layer of air. Air is a poor conductor of heat. So what happens is that it reduces the amount of heat that is lost by our body. And this, of course, is the goal. Because the temperatures are low, it's cold. We need to lose as little heat as possible. Now, this leads to the formation of goosebumps. These are good goosebumps. By the way, whenever you felt cold, really cold, you will see this. You will see that the hair on your body stands upright, on your skin stands upright, and you have these raised, I don't even know what to, but these raised thingies, that are called goosebumps. So this is because of this. Now, what if it's hot? When it's hot, you need to lose the excess heat. So in this case, the erector pili muscle relaxes, and by doing so, it causes the hair to lie flat on the surface of your skin. So more heat can then be lost. Now, moving on to the final structure of the dermis, the sebaceous glands. Now, the sebaceous glands open up into the hair follicles, you see? Now, they produce a fluid known as sebum. Sebum has two functions. Number one, it's antiseptic. Antiseptic means that it has the ability to kill microorganisms that are found on the surface of the skin. Now, the other function is that it keeps the hair and skin supple and waterproof. Now, this is our own natural moisturizer. By the way, this is something that you would have noticed. Now, on to the last structure. Now, this is the subcutaneous fat. It's actually a layer that is found beneath the dermis. So this is the epidermis, that is the dermis, and underneath the dermis is where you're going to have this layer of fat known as the subcutaneous fat. This is very important because it also plays a role in thermoregulation. Fat, just like air, is a poor conductor of heat. So little heat is going to be lost to the surrounding, okay? Number two, it acts as a shock absorber. It protects the internal parts of the body from mechanical damage. And lastly is that it stores fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamin A, D, and K. Now, we have fat-soluble vitamins. We also have water-soluble vitamins. So the fat-soluble vitamins are the ones that are stored in the subcutaneous fat. And that, my dear students, is that on the structure of the skin.